Hello, and thank you for tuning in to another episode of the Moss Center's Dance Talk. Today's talk features the amazing Dance Theatre of Harlem, who will be here with us performing on Friday, January 19th and Saturday, January 20th. I'm Annie Hoffman, and I'm the Education and Outreach Manager here at the Moss Center. This opportunity is brought to you with support of the Miami-Dade County Department of Cultural Affairs, the Board of County Commissioners, and the Office of the Mayor. I would now like to introduce our moderator, Anjali Austin, who will introduce our distinguished panelists. Anjali?
Thank you, Annie. And I also want to say I certainly appreciate the opportunity to be able to serve as moderators for such distinguished colleagues. Robert Garland, Director of Dance Theatre of Harlem, Artistic Director, and Tai Jimenez, Director of the Dance Theatre of Harlem School. So to begin with, I'd like to ask each of you to talk a little bit about your pre-professional background in terms of how you came into ballet and to dance.
I'm going to Ty start that.
Sure. Okay. Hi, everyone. Anjali, it's just so great to see you again. Thanks for having me. I started dancing at a local school where I grew up in Jamaica, Queens, New York City. My first teacher, her name was Joan Millen Mesh, and she was the mother of Sherelle Mesh Alexander, who was then a rising star with the Alvin Ailey Dance Theater. My first exposure to ballet and to modern dance was through Miss Joan, as we called her, who was a Black woman, I will say that, and also a graduate of the Juilliard School. And from the very beginning, I was exposed to excellence in dance through Sherelle. Sherelle sort of took me under her wing. She would take me to watch rehearsals at Ailey, and I got to watch these professional dancers at work, behind the scenes, which, looking back on that was an extraordinary thing. From there, I went to the School of American Ballet for 4 years. After that, I went to study at Ailey for a little bit, but then I realized I really wanted to focus on ballet. And I studied with Madame Gabriela Darvash for several years. And it was really under her guidance that I started to really do that transformational work and really become focused. And then from there, I went to the Dance Theatre of Harlem, where I was in the second company and studied under Nancy Schaffenberg. And then out of that, I went into the main company really shortly after that. Within like 6 months, I was working with the company.
Thank you.
My background is Philadelphia based. I began studying at a very small dance school. I started late. I started at the age of 13, almost 14 years old, ninth grade, but I progressed really quickly. Ended up at Pennsylvania Ballet. But then someone said, there's this dance company, the Philadelphia Dance Company, run by a woman, Jo Myers-Brown, that I think you should try to go see her as well, because she had a ballet background as well. So I went, she saw me, I ended up dancing and studying there pretty much for the rest of my high school education in Philadelphia. Philadelphia has a really rich history of Black ballet dancers. More famous among them is Jo Myers-Brown, but there are others. China White is another one who danced with us here at Dance Theatre of Harlem. And then I left Philadelphia, went to Juilliard, and then right after graduation to Juilliard, I went to Dance Theatre of Harlem, and I too studied at, so when I was in college, I knew Ty as a high school student at Gabriela Darvash's. That's where I first met her. Yeah, and we both ended up at Dance Theatre of Harlem.
So interesting hearing you all talk about this. I'm thinking about the connections that we have, because I remember also taking class with Darvash and really getting a sense of, just something about the way that she not only taught, but coached in
Yeah.
a way, which, you know, in an open format like that, it's kind of incredible thinking about it now as a teacher.
Yes.
But
The
yes.
recommendation for me to go study there was from Mel Tomlinson.
Ah,
Mel
interesting.
had studied with a former, for those that don't know, a former uh, uh, dance to the Harlem dancer, but he sort of is like the EGOT of male dancers because he danced with Dance to the Harlem, Alvin Ailey, New York City Ballet, and American Ballet Theater.
Mhm.
And
Great
Boston Ballet at some point, right?
Sim Ballet.
Ballet. Yeah.
Yes.
Yes.
And Madame Darvash also had a connection with Dance Theatre of Harlem. I think her first ballet in the United States was for Dance Theatre of Harlem
That's
Ah,
after she immigrated from Romania.
Yeah, she choreographed a balcony pas de deux for Lydia Barca and Paul Russell. And there's actually a picture of that in my now office that Virginia had in there as well.
wow.
Yeah.
Well, talking about Dance Theatre of Harlem, can you speak to or a little bit about your own careers as dance artists?
Yeah, so I came to Dance Theatre of Harlem when I was 17 in the second company, as I said. Started working with the main company shortly after that. Um, and it was really there that I feel like I started to flourish as a dancer. Mr. Mitchell created this environment where I didn't have to constantly feel debilitated by race and racism. And I was with the company for many years from, let's see, 1997 until 2004. However, during that time, I took several breaks from dancing. Once I just wanted to grow as a person and I went to college for a while. At another point, I left and I performed on Broadway and I was pursuing, commercial dance. I did commercials, film, television. But I always came back to DTH because I always felt like I did my best dancing there. And Mr. Mitchell, to his credit, always welcomed me back with open arms, no questions asked. Um, From there, when the company went on a prolonged hiatus in 2004, I freelanced for a while. I guested different places, guested with Lula Washington for a stint. And then I joined Boston Ballet. And I pretty much just finished out my performing career at Boston Ballet.
Robert.
I'm sorry, I was so fascinated listening to Ty. The question was, our careers at Dance in Harlem, is that what you were asking?
Yeah.
I had a wonderful life lesson at Dance of Harlem. When I got to Juilliard, which is where I'm sitting right now, it was really hard because there was not at that time a lot of support for people of color and particularly black dancers. And so I healed myself by reading James Baldwin. I read the entire oeuvre of James Baldwin's work, and so I left. And so in finding a place, I think that I lived with the Ailey dancer for a very long time. His name was Gary DeLoach, and so the assumption was that I would go and dance with Ailey during my time at Juilliard. When I got out of Juilliard, I knew I needed something else. And so I met Mr. Mitchell, and I think in hindsight, and this is something I've discovered recently, because as you get older, you discover things. I think my choice to dance at Dance Theatre Harlem came from the fact that Mr. Mitchell was such an intellectual, and I just appreciated that. Outside of his arc of his history as a performer and creating Dance Theatre Harlem, he was a real thinker. And so right now I'm sorry, this is not really answering the question, but right now it's my life's work to get the world to understand him in that way. But while at Dance Theatre Harlem, I did the range of what anybody at Dance Theatre Harlem would do. And in programming now, I try to follow that same mix, actually. Something that is based in the African American diaspora, something that is neoclassical purely, and then something that's a little contemporary offbeat, like you guys did Dowena at the time, I think, which was a really beautiful, and of course, Adagio of Number 5 by Royston Muldoon, both, which was kind of our contemporary thing. Before there was a contemporary, this is the other genius of Arthur Mitchell, before that word became a thing, because I remember my first rehearsal at Dance Theatre of Harlem was for Toccata, E Due Canzoni. And I don't know if you remember this, Ange, but the grant that they had applied for required the ballet choreographer to work with a modern person, and they never met before. Do you remember that?
I do not remember that. Interesting.
Yes. And so John McFall and the woman that was there, and I forget her name, but had never met before, and so but were required to create this work, and it ended up being Toccata.
Mhm.
And
Which
so
is a
next
beautiful
year,
work.
what was that?
A beautiful work.
The beautiful work, yes, absolutely. And then the next year, we had Garth Fagan working with us. So Arthur Mitchell was already looking at around corners at contemporary work way before a lot of people. So again, a testament to his always being in the forefront. So
Yeah. And I do,
Sorry.
well, I was just going to say, I do think that you are on point in terms of being able to share, yes, your experiences there as a dancer, but also you've both spoken about how you're going to college, wanting to expand yourself, also the reading of Baldwin. So there was this constant kind of culture, intellectual curiosity, but almost responsibility at the same
yes.
time.
Wow, can I record that and use it in our marketing materials? But that's exactly what it is. It's a very different thing, I hate comparing us to Ailey, but I did live with an Ailey dancer for about 12 years. So I had a chance to kind of observe that culture. And Dancing in Harlem is distinctly different in that sense, And so yeah, the department where I'm sitting right now is run by Alicia Graff, who is a Dance Theatre Harlem alum, so that's Anthony Tudor, by the way, behind me.
Hi, I'm sorry, interrupted you. You were going to say,
Well, I think, Robert was saying how he was attracted to Mr. Mitchell because he was such an intellectual. And I feel like often when you have somebody like a Miss Arthur Mitchell or Misty Copeland, who is the first, their artistic contributions almost get overlooked. It's like we're in the shadow of the fact that they were the first Black principal dancer with a major company, and sometimes like what their artistry actually doesn't get discussed. The conversation just centers around that.
That's right.
And it wasn't just that, it was that he was an extraordinary artist. And I think that just being that in that environment, we were always inspired to do such a rigorous examination of the work, of the music, of the choreography, of how to build a character. It was such a thorough process, and he really made an effort to bring in work that made us grow as artists and as people.
Well, and his choices, his choices that actually predate any of us. Like if you go on TikTok now and you Google or search for Zelda Wynn, there's a whole fashion-centric TikTok group that have rediscovered her. And it's remarkable that Arthur Mitchell had the foresight to say, you know what, you can do ballet costuming. Like he trusted her in that way. And the same thing goes for his first music director, Tanya Leone, who just received a Kennedy Center honor last year. Like he really saw people and knew where they fit.
and so Robert, I'm going to ask you to do just a little background on each of them because some people may not have heard those names before.
Okay. Wow. Okay. Well, Zelda Wynn Valdez, which was her full married name, was a Black woman. She was a couturier for all of the Black stars of the 40s and the 50s. There's actually an exhibit here. Virginia just sent me a text about her at a museum downtown. But she dressed all the stars from Gladys Knight to Lena Horne, all of the women that, quite honestly, probably were not dealt with because they were Black women by the fashion intelligentsia. And so she was their person that did their gowns, all the things they presented themselves in. And so Arthur Mitchell literally went to her and she said, yeah, I've never done a tutu before. And he said, the top of the gown is a tutu. What are you talking about? And so she was hired to do the work. And I think the most stunning thing is the fact that there was a woman, Yanchi Stevenson, a dancer, who came in with tights that she had dyed the color of her legs. Arthur Mitchell saw that and he went to Zelda Wynn to implement it. And so she's the one that got up boiling pots and dye and getting things right, and which we all live with to this day, actually. And now a lot of manufacturers in 2023 now finally have, 50 years later, this technique. So that's Zelda Wynn Valdez. And then Tanya Leon, she was a Cuban-born emigre. She moved to the United States to study here, her music. She was a child prodigy in Cuba. She basically was inside of this Black classical group here was studying at NYU, but she needed to make money. And so she'd heard about ballet accompanying. She approached Arthur Mitchell. She spoke no English, but she said she sat down and started playing, and he said, okay, you're hired. And then he said, okay, I'm going to come be play. He's like, no, you're going to be my music director. And so he did that again, and these are very important stories for me because ballet is predominated by women, what I should say actually Caucasian women, and so I think that these stories help to support the idea of Dance at Harlem as a thing that was of value then and is still of value in that regard, I believe, because the demography of the predominantly white ballet institutions, quite frankly, has not changed. So I'm sorry, I could go on, but
No, that's it. I just want to add one thing also about Tanya is that she is also an accomplished composer.
yes,
And a conductor who has traveled and served as a conductor at a variety of different orchestras all over the world.
that's right.
Again, the seed is planted somehow
Totally.
through Mr. Mitchell, and then people have an opportunity to grow in their direction.
That's right. Yeah.
So thinking of this, I'm just wondering if you could put your dancer mind on, post-dancer mind, and then could you have seen yourself in these positions at that point?
That's an interesting question. I believe so. Well, let me just say this. When I decided to focus on choreography, Arthur Mitchell said, okay, that's fine. He said, I've been thinking about having a resident choreographer. I think that would be great. He said, but I also need a director of the school. And I think he made that choice because he knew that while I love the creating works for Tai and Anjali type professionals, there is another administrative kind of like the business of the art. And he knew, I think, that I needed to learn that. And I learned that through running the school. That's where I learned that, which was far more valuable, quite honestly, than choreographing for dancers that were professionals, even though I'd love to do that as well. So in that sense, I do kind of see now, sitting in this seat, how that could be. Although at the time, man, it was very hard for me. So I was like, run the school, schedule a couple classes, blah, blah. No, I had parents that would, for the tuition, they would count out the classes, what the per class cost was. So any ship from that, they were learning how to deal with customer service, actually, to be honest. customer service. Because the conservatory works a little different than like the academic space, like the college space, you know. And so you have to be responsible. And so Tai, when I went into this role, I was like, I need someone that can do that, you know. And so I thought of Tai. So yes.
Big learning curve. You know, when I retired from dancing, it took me a long time to just settle into finding who I was without that identity anymore. And I actually found that I needed to devote a lot of time to my own healing. Um, you know, in my pursuit of becoming a ballerina, I went off my path in certain ways. And, you know, we're talking about the dance world. So I will say quite openly with eating disorders and all of that, I was struggling with all of that. So when I retired from dancing, I wasn't really thinking so much about what my next job was going to be. I was really kind of looking at myself and where I had landed and thinking that I really needed to do some healing. And I devoted a lot of time to that. I sort of fell into teaching, and it was not really something that I thought a lot about while I was dancing. But when I started teaching, I realized that I had been preparing for that all along. I always thought like a teacher. I think like a lot of Black dancers, there's like gaps in our training. So I had to fill a lot of those gaps myself. And it wouldn't be unusual for me to take class, let's say, you know, in the half an hour we had between class and rehearsal, I would give myself another bar, you know, or I would just really constantly working on my technique. And so when it was time to begin teaching, I realized I had been thinking like a teacher all along. I would often take different classes, and I would pick apart the class and why this class worked and why it didn't work. I would have done this petit allegro to a 6/8 instead of a 4/4. Or like I was always processing the class. And I would often go take other kinds of classes. Like I would step way out of my comfort zone. I would explore Butoh, or I would go and take a Horton class, which I hadn't done a lot of, and I would, you know, watch how different people constructed class. And I remember once doing a workshop with David Dorfman, just kind of because, you know, and he would start the class off in a very unusual way. He would pair people up and they would give each other like a massage. And I was like, you can do that? Wow, it blew my mind. And then I was thinking a lot about class, and I got really involved in the practice of yoga. I actually met my husband there. We continue to practice together to this day, 12 years later, 12 years of marriage later. And I learned so much through yoga. You know, unlike a lot of people nowadays who go to study dance through a university where they have the study of anatomy. I never really studied anatomy. I learned about anatomy through my injuries, actually. But with yoga, I started to really learn a lot about anatomy and the importance of breath. And as I was teaching, all of these sort of different approaches would find their way into the ballet class. And I don't know, I'm getting off on a tangent a little bit, but that's all to say that as I started my teaching practice, I started to find myself more in my power than I had ever felt as a dancer. And that surprised me. And my eye for mastery and what's really important as a dancer in our hierarchy of choices that we can make in any moment started to really clarify. And it was a surprise because I went through such a period of mourning after I stopped performing, you know, and I found that, oh, there's actually more to me than, I don't want to say just being a dancer, but it was like an evolution. And now being in the position of directing a school, it's like, wow, it's like another step back even from teaching and looking at how the whole organism works, you know? So it's like my perspective just keeps growing. And I'm really just grateful for that, as long as I can keep my heart open to that, you know, to that growth amidst the challenges. Because like I was saying, stepping into this role of director, it has been a huge learning curve. Yeah.
I kind of like to stay on this topic because I'm curious now what your experience is working with dancers today
Mm.
and what you see that they are, how they are developing. What's their process now for digging into this craft?
From, mm,
Ooh, wow, that's a, I have a group of dancers that are aged 19 to about 30 something. They are governed by their social media, you know. It is something that, of course, caused a kind of resistance in me at first, and then moving into the idea of understanding them better, I just began to understand that while they have this social media presence, that they're some of the things that we would work out amongst ourselves, person to person, they're less inclined to do. So there's lots that they hold on to and are not able to, quite frankly, share. So I have to deal with this group with a lot of love first. I can get to the critical part, but unlike our generation, I believe that starting with the critique of them is a real. It's a no no. It'll never work. It'll never work because they critique themselves via their social media feeds all the time, you know. And so for me, that is a real big thing, and building a supportive environment in the tradition of what we know. We know an environment, and I think that part of that maybe had to do with the fact that as an entity, Dance of Harlem always sat separate from so many other things outside of the ballet, outside of the Black modern dance experience, but inside both, you know. And so navigating that was a thing, and it created an environment of, quite frankly, support and love that I'm not. I was on the phone with Evelyn the other day, and we were talking about, being the dean now of North Carolina. And so she said something to me. I hung up, and then like 4 hours later, I called her back. I was like, and let's go back over that for a minute, because I just needed to understand. And so that's the only thing that's how families work, and it was a beautiful moment. And she said at the end of it, she's like, Robert, I'm so glad you called me back because that my mind was there as well. So I'm trying to recreate what we've always had, to be perfectly honest. That support. Yeah.
I've noticed when I watch the company, and I've said this to Robert, the energy in the room is really different from when we were dancing. They're so supportive of each other. It doesn't feel so competitive in there. And I think, when the company went on a hiatus in 2004, we lost a lot, but that's also an opportunity to rebuild from a more loving perspective, I think.
Yeah.
One thing that I deal with a lot is there are a lot of things that you used to learn simply by being in the environment. And that doesn't happen so much anymore. For example, I had a young lady audition who was quite talented. She was 21, which is a little bit old for us, but I always subtract 3 years for COVID, right? And she was telling me that she took 3 classes a week and that she had professional aspirations. And I'm thinking to myself, well, if you really want to dance professionally, you need to be in 3 classes a day, 6 days a week. And we, growing up, we just started to understand that because we saw everybody else around us doing that. But then after the COVID, I realized that they are not being we have to rebuild the entire culture, if that makes sense.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Totally.
So if Arthur Mitchell were here today, what 2 questions would you ask him?
That's a tough one. And when you said it earlier, it was tough for me then as well. Oh boy.
I'm always like given to mysticism and spirituality. And this is something that a lot of people don't know about Mr. Mitchell because he was too. And sometimes we get into those conversations. So my first question would be about the other side
Mhm.
and how things look from that perspective.
Mhm.
And um, he was so insightful. He had a way of understanding the central knot within a person's personality. And so I would ask him about how I'm doing and if there's something that I'm not doing that he would like to see, or if there's a way that I'm getting in my own way. You know, he was a mentor in that way. And so I'd probably ask him about that. Like, is there something I'm missing, or is there something more that I need to do? I remember often he would tell me I needed to be more flexible. And so as I move back into this position, I'm often thinking about that dancer that I that was just ah so ferocious all the time and hard with myself and hard with everybody else around me. How can I soften those edges and learn how to flow a little bit more and learn how to be more flexible? Yeah.
I would ask him, because Black institutions have been historically under-resourced over the years. And that is up against the, I'll call it mythology of this being a meritocracy. And this conversation comes up now quite a bit, even at the academia level, in the sense that, people are learning that it has become less and less about it being a meritocracy. And I think there was a moment in Mr. Mitchell's life where and in fact, in one of the interviews, and I believe it's in the first 60 minutes, which are kind of, since we were so on top of it and close to it, that it was just Mr. Mitchell talking. But in viewing it again, he says, I've done the work. I've raised the money. I've gotten the dancers. I've had them dance the full orchestras. I've done the work, which he did do, and there was and I think that there was a moment in his life where he was like, you know what? It's clear to me that in my lifetime, I may not ever get the resources I need to have this organization move forward the way I would like it. But what I could create is this, as Tai has referenced, an army of people that understand the opera house ballet aesthetic.
Mhm.
And that is a thing. I didn't get that. I'm here at Juilliard. I didn't get that here. I got that from Dance Theatre of Harlem, the idea of how all of that comes together. So when I go to work in other environments, like one of my dancers just was a soloist in New York City Ballet's Nutcracker because they never had a Black female soloist before. In any of those roles, she did Dewdrop. So when I'm in that space, it feels very normal to me. And the reason why it feels normal is because of Dance Theatre of Harlem, and both from the business side, like understanding how it all comes together, to the artistic side. Like, no, Dance to the Harlem doing Les Notes wasn't going to get us like, oh my God, it's like their best thing since sliced bread. But dancing Stravinsky's Les Notes, the Jenska, it was one of the hallmarks of my life because that was a great work. And great work will always be great work. And so I would ask them, like, it was that your intention, which I believe it was, to just be like, you know what? I know Angie's going to end up there. I know Robert's going to end up there. I know Todd's going to end up there. So let me put in them as much as I can, from every different perspective. It's so weird. People come to me now and they say strange things like, oh, she's the first female choreographer to ever choreograph him. Like, people don't know about Nijinsky now. Like, it's really it's scary, So that's the other thing, is like correcting history. The whole role that Virginia, like people say, what about roles for non-binary and transgender people? Well, Labiche had that. That was Labiche. Mr. Franklin pulled me to the side. He was like, Robert, that's supposed to be a trans person there. That's what that character is. And I was like, that's so interesting. And it made you read the ballet differently, very racy, actually, Nijinsky was in that one. So with the guy, with the hostess and the two men and that whole thing, yeah, it's so, yeah. But anyway, I would ask him that. I would be like, when did you just say, you know what, let me just give them as much art as I can muster down their throats.
And I don't know if you all have these experiences sometimes, but I feel like the spirit of Arthur Mitchell comes into me sometimes when I'm teaching or when I have a thought. It's just something, and it doesn't have to be much, but I just sometimes get this.
A weird, yes. And sometimes it comes out verbally, and I'll hear it, and I'll be like, ooh, wow, that was really weird.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I've just learned to say, okay, I'm listening. It just for what it is at that moment. Yeah.
There you go.
So
Yeah.
on the other side of this, what do you think Arthur Mitchell would say to you now?
Wow. I think that he would actually be a little proud of me, because I did watch him. I watched him both at the dancer, artistic level and the studio stuff, but also dealing with funders, dealing with board members, anticipating things that you didn't quite think were going to happen, like all of those things. I watched him navigate, and he was very predictive in that way. He was very predictive. Like, he would often say, this is going to happen because da 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 da. And it would. And I'd be like, oh my God, like, wow. So I think that would be one of the things that, that would be a thing, I think. I got off on a tangent. I'm sorry.
I think he would tell me to trust myself. I think he would be proud of the way Dance Theatre of Harlem has maintained a feeling of family. And I think that Robert has done a great job of reuniting the family and making the school that I inherited such a warm place to be. And I think sometimes Robert actually misses the school, because he'll just come on a Saturday and hang out and look at the little kids. And
Totally.
what we were saying earlier about rebuilding from a foundation of love, I think it's really apparent in the school. And it's something that I think maybe distinguishes us from a lot of other places. That there's just so much warmth there. I'm hoping that it feels like a second home for our students and our families.
Yeah. And the families that come to us that have experience in other places often comment on that. Wow. Okay. So is this, so it's very interesting. And there are people, because, we do have, quite frankly, a great brand in terms of our name and our reputation. So people do come to it already with an idea that it's going to be this other thing. And then when it's not, they're like, oh, wow, you mean like you care about that? You called me when my child didn't show up, like things like that. It's a part of what I've learned as part of our culture. Yeah.
Yeah.
So can you talk a little bit about the performances that are coming up at the Moss Center?
Yes. So there were three things being shown. Sounds of Hazel, choreographed by Tiffany Rea-Fisher. It is a wonderful piece. Hazel Scott was a woman who was a great musician. She was also the paramour of Adam Clayton Powell Jr., who was pastor at my current church, Abyssinian Baptist Church. And it's dedicated to her life and her movement from Trinidad to New York City and beyond to her worldwide success. And so Tiffany Rea-Fisher has assembled wonderful clips of her speaking about her life as a what was then called Negro, alongside some other works that are set in certain places. And there are three different representations of Miss Scott, one in the Trinidad space, one in the New York space, and then her space as she presented herself to the world. So it's a wonderful, wonderful work. And then the second piece on the program, which you both know very well, is Allegro Brilliante, which is in alignment with our ballet background, our neoclassical roots via George Balanchine, via Arthur Mitchell. And so that, of course, is just a wonderful evocation of a beautiful Tchaikovsky score, and it kind of puts us or presents the thing that is our standard, which is, at the end of the day, a ballet standard. And so there's that. And then I believe we're closing, or I believe the closing piece is Bar Project. Oh, thank you, darling. Return. Return is a ballet that I choreographed to the music of James Brown and Aretha Franklin for Dance Theatre of Harlem's, I think it was our 30th anniversary. I'd had already choreographed some ballets. I grew up in the Virginia Johnson phase of like, let's get big ballets for Virginia Johnson, So a lot of the initial work that I did was very kind of a big ballet in that sense. And I used Virginia in all of them because we were dancing in opera houses and, seeing Fall River Legend, where you have like churches that are turning into gallows, that are turning into homes. And, it was a brilliant and had an effect on me. But it was also very costly. So after I did a ballet called Crossing Over, which was costly as well, he came to me and said, young man, the next ballet, you get 12 dancers, lights and tights, and no nothing else. And that was my first hit, Return. I created a work called Return to the music of James Brown and Aretha Franklin. And it was very interesting to me that it was something that had been sitting there in my head for such a long time. But I guess I maybe was afraid to touch it because I so revere the memory of forces of rhythm that we all dance. And I was like, if you can screw that up, if you're going to do something in that vein, you have to do the best you can. So Return is the other ballet on the program there as well.
Wonderful. And I've had a chance to see each of those pieces. It is not to be missed. They are not to be missed. And Hazel Scott very much enjoyed that, seeing that new work and the dancers in it.
Yeah. And they have a good time performing it as well. Yeah.
Is there anything else you'd like to share?
Well, just that I'm so happy to be in this space when I'm ready for it. That kind of timing you just cannot even. Now that I'm in this particular chair, I feel like I'm here purposefully, and not scrambling to catch up, with information for or how I need to be in this moment. And I would say that Tai probably feels a little the same way too. It's wonderful that she has had the wherewithal to be present through the trajectory of her life to kind of, at the end of the day, put together the pieces that not only will help her students as artists, but also as people, and because at the end of the day, that is honestly what Arthur Mitchell's, I think, dream was. He believed that the arts could really transform lives. And I think that when he used the word art, a lot of people maybe interpret that as ballet, but I don't think that's what he meant. I think it was much broader in terms of a philosophy of how you apply yourself to this thing that's non-competitive, that's just you, you know. So, so that's what I'd like to close with.
I think as an artist, you can only ever express who you are. And so we have to nurture all parts of ourselves. And I hope to bring that awareness and that sense of balance into the training as well. And feeling grateful and optimistic about what lies ahead. Like Robert says, it's been a long road, and I think that it will continue to be a long road. I think Mr. Mitchell would tell me to just slow down. There's a long way to go, pace yourself. And I'm really looking forward to being on this journey with Robert. I don't know that I would have stepped into this position if it hadn't been for him, because he's someone that I've known for a really long time, who has always been a good person and who has always had a very clear moral compass. So wherever we're headed, I know that something beautiful will be born from that.
Thank you.
And yeah, it's been after I retired from dance, and I went and I taught at many different places and saw many different styles of leadership. But it's at DTH where I feel a real sense of purpose. The message is so much bigger than just about training dancers. If people become dancers, that's great. That's like the cherry on top. But really, it's about making good humans for the future.
Mhm.
And how art, plays a role in our lives of reminding us of who we are, of our real essential power as creators.
Robert and Kai, you all are great representatives and examples of how to have a life in dance and art and move it forward through your leadership. It has been a gift to see you guys and have this time with you. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thanks for having us.
And thank you so much to our moderator, Anjali Austin, to our amazing panelists, and thanks to you for tuning in to another episode of our incredible dance talks. Tickets for the Dance Theatre of Harlem performances at the Moss Center on Friday, January 19th and Saturday, January 20th are available now. Please visit mosscenter.org to get your tickets, and we look forward to seeing you there. Thank you so much.
Thank you.